Today's objective is I can find the measurement of a missing angle by writing an equation and applying a strategy. So in our last additive angles video, we talked about a couple of things. We talked about some benchmark angles that we already have memorized, like 90-degree angles and straight angles. We talked about additive angles being two angles within a whole angle. So this is our total angle, or our whole, and then we have two parts. So when we add these two parts up, we get our whole angle. We talked about how the area between where two lines meet, we call this an angle. And we measure angles in degrees. And our little symbol to show degrees is this little circle. We also talked about labeling angles. So each point of an angle can have a letter. So the way that we would read this angle here is we could call it angle LMN. And that helps us read angles. We are going to use everything that we've learned about angles in the past and everything that we've learned in our last video to solve this next question. In the drawing shown, the measure of angle RTQ is 27 degrees, and the measure of angle UTQ is 122 degrees. What is the measure of angle RTU? We're going to use our steps to solve to help us answer this question. So our first step tells us to draw and label the angles. So we're going to use what we're given in the problem to help us label the picture. So our question tells us that the measure of angle RTQ is 27 degrees. So to help me figure out which angle they're talking about here, which angle is 27 degrees, I trace the angle RTQ. So this is how I do it. I start at R, I trace all the way down to T, and then all the way back to Q. So this is angle RTQ. I'm going to label it with an arc. And I know that this measures 27 degrees. We also know that the measure of angle UTQ is 122 degrees. So again, I'm going to trace each line using the letters they give us, UTQ. So I start at U, I trace all the way down to T, and over to Q. So now we're talking about this whole angle here. And this is going to be 122 degrees. Next up, we want to solve for the measure of angle RTU. So let's take a look at which angle that is. RTU. So I'm starting at R, trace down to T, and I end at U. So now we're talking about this angle here. And this angle is what we're solving for. We don't know that measurement yet. So now we have everything from the problem labeled on our picture. So let's move on to step 2. Step 2 tells us to draw a part whole chart. So start with a box. The top is going to be our whole. This is our total. And then split the bottom 2 pieces up. These are going to be our 2 parts. So I label that with part and part. Next, we need to fill in our part whole chart using everything we know. So first up, our whole. We do have a hole here, right? This whole big angle UTQ, that we labeled 122 degrees, that's our hole. Now when we look inside of our whole big angle, we see these 2 smaller pieces. We're given this part, 27 degrees, and we're missing this part. So I'm going to put a question mark there. So moving back to our anchor chart, our next step, step 3, is to identify the operation. We have to figure out if we're going to add or subtract to solve. So anytime you have a part whole chart, you decide your operation based on the information you're given. For example, if you're given your 2 parts and you're missing your whole, we're going to add these 2 parts to solve for our whole. Now, if you are given your whole, given 1 part, and missing another part, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to subtract to solve for the missing part. So look at our chart. I'm given a whole, we know our part, and we're missing a part. That tells me that we can take our part away from our whole to solve for our missing part. So we are going to be subtracting. So we've identified our operation, we're subtracting. Now we're moving on to our last step, use a strategy to solve. So let's stack our numbers and subtract using the standard algorithm. We've got 122 degrees minus 27 degrees. So we've got 2 minus 7. Can't do that, we need to borrow. Our 2 becomes a 1. Our 2 becomes a 12. 12 minus 7 is 5. Moving over, 1 minus 2. Can't do that, so we go next door and borrow. Our 1 becomes a 0, and our 1 becomes an 11 when we add 10. 11 minus 2 is 9. So we've got 95 degrees. We can plug that back into our chart. And add it to our picture. Now the last thing we can do to check our work is we can take our two parts, add them together to check to make sure they equal 122 degrees. So we're going to take 95 degrees plus 27 degrees. We're adding them up to check our work. 7 plus 5 is 12. 9 plus 2 is 11. Plus 1 is 12. 122 degrees. Yep, that matches our hole. So our answer is correct. Awesome work, 4th grade. Make sure you take a picture of your work and submit it.